Live, this is AM Agenda with Kieran Gilbert.
Good morning and welcome to the program. The Labor Party says it's time for the government to start showing its policies on tax and stop the talk. Well, as I understand it, that's not going to be happening today, with no further detail from the government in terms of its plans on negative gearing or whatever else. We know from the Prime Minister yesterday formally that the GST has been shelved. But today the speech from Scott Morrison is about a broader context for this ongoing debate on tax. In fact, we've received some of the speech notes from Mr Morrison. Let's have a look at them. We need to get expenditure below revenue, not push revenue through higher taxes above expenditure. This is from this speech today. He's going to go on to say that, essentially the problem with new spends supposedly offset by saves is that the spending is locked in, the saving gets blocked. That a bit of a reference, you'd have to think, to the 2014 budget, which was tough politically, but a lot of the saves never got through. And then he'll say the government understands that $1 in your hand means you are more likely to make it into $2, while $1 in the government's hand more likely to turn it into 50 cents. So to reiterate the government's support for tax cuts, albeit much more constrained tax relief now, given they've shelved the GST. With me to look at this and the other issues of the day, I'm joined by the Minister for Resources and Minister for Northern Australia, Josh Frydenberg, live from Brisbane. Mr Frydenberg, a lot to talk about. I want to get to the infrastructure discussion, also Julie Bishop's war of words with China on the South China Sea. But first, on the issue of tax, Josh, this framing of the debate from Mr Morrison, really we've known this for a long time, that the problem with the budget, he believes it's expenditure. Isn't it time for the government to start putting a bit more meat on the bones when it comes to your plans on tax?
Well, Scott Morrison is absolutely right. We do have to bring spending under control, given the horrible fiscal legacy that was bequeathed to us by the Labor government. I mean, we are spending $1 billion a month on the interest bill on Labor's debt. And the problem with getting spending down...
But we've known this for a long time.
Yeah, and it is very difficult. We've got billions of dollars worth of savings measures that are being blocked by the Labor Party in the Senate. And when you consider that nearly 90% of government spending is tied to legislation and we don't have the majority in the upper house, it shows you how difficult it is. But I want to say that Scott and Matthias have made significant headway in bringing spending under control, because over the forward estimates will bring spending from a proportion of GDP at 25.9% down to 25.3%. But I'm sure
the thing
Scott
is,
will
the
talk
government's been going on about
that
this
today.
debt issue and the spending issue, left by Labor for a number of years now. This is the message from the government in that sense is not new.
Well, it's not just the message, it's also the action. And we have billions of dollars worth of savings measures which we've introduced to the Parliament that the Labor Party is standing in the way of. At the same time, they're proposing higher taxes and more spending. So on the one hand, you've got us trying to be fiscally prudent and responsible. On the other hand, Labor being all care and no responsibility.
This comment by Scott Morrison today, as I mentioned at the start of the program, these are from his speech notes today, but he says the problem with new spend supposedly offset by saves is that the spending is locked in, the saving gets blocked. That seems to me to be a very direct reference to the 2014 budget, where the government, fine, it had a whole heap of saves, but as you've mentioned this morning, they've got blocked. The spending's locked in, the savings get blocked. That's his point. So he's arguing today, he's starting from scratch in many respects.
Well, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the Treasurer, doesn't it, when it comes to the budget? And he's got a very difficult task, because he's got to put up savings measures, he's got to win political support for them, and he's got to turn them into reality. And it's proven that that's not always easy. So he understandably wants to keep spending, even that it's tied to savings, under control, bearing in mind that you can't always get those savings through the Senate. So it's a very sort of sensible position that he's adopting on this.
And it's being read as a message to you and your colleagues as much as it is to the electorate that, well, not you personally, but the ministerial ranks, that any spending measures you like to put forward in this election year will have to be rethought. Stop spending's the front page of The Australian.
Well, as you know, resources and energy isn't a big spending portfolio. They don't put their hand out for government. They actually produce billions of dollars.
Isn't it?
Well, we have a concessional
Infrastructure
loan
and so on.
scheme. We have a concessional loan scheme, which is different to a grant scheme, so that money has to be paid back. So effectively, it's budget neutral over the life of that loan scheme. But when it comes to resources and energy, that is absolutely fundamental to the success of the Australian economy, because we're just earning billions and billions of dollars from export earnings, even at a time of low commodity prices.
Let's look at the infrastructure plan today, a 15-year plan, some really compelling messages in this Infrastructure Australia report that's being released today, in fact, by the Prime Minister there in Brisbane. And, well, basically the message is the government has to plan now, given our population growth is going to outstrip comparable nations. It's talking about road charges for road users, increasing road charges, and also saying to government, think about acquiring more debt if you're going to spend it on productive infrastructure. Are we closing our minds to some of the key remedies here?
I think we all understand that good infrastructure is central to economic prosperity and to reducing some of the congestion in our cities, and the Prime Minister gets that by setting up a minister that is responsible for cities under his ultimate authority. So I think this report, which will be released later today, will be very interesting. I certainly know from the area that I'm responsible for, energy infrastructure, that what the Infrastructure Australia is talking about is consistent with what the COAG energy ministers have been pushing for some time, namely flexibility, innovation in service delivery, but also turning some of these public monopolies in the provision of energy supplies into corporatised organisations, both at the network end or the distribution or at the retail end. And that's been very successful to date, but we're keeping to pushing ahead with those reforms.
And he's also saying, Mark Birrell, the head of Infrastructure Australia, saying the government needs to consider borrowing more to fund some of these projects to accommodate our population growth. He's likening this to the 50s and 60s, where we had enormous population growth, but governments of the day dealt with it. Do our politicians have the courage to deal with these sorts of things, particularly when you're making such a big deal of debt?
Well, as I just said, with the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility, that's a concessional loan scheme where effectively we're leveraging off the strength of the government's balance sheet to invest in the necessary
But can you do that across the capital cities
infrastructure
as well? Is that a model that can be extended?
Well, let's just see what the Prime Minister has to say later today. But I know that he's seized of this issue and he understands how important it is, Kieran, to get the right infrastructure in place, because there is a major economic dividend. I mean, I can only talk about the experience from the north of our country, and if you can get the right communications infrastructure, the right energy infrastructure, the right water infrastructure and the right transport infrastructure, the payoffs are huge, and you can invite greater population growth in that part of Australia, which currently has 40% of our land mass but only 5% of our national population.
Let's look at a few other issues. I want to get to the South China Sea matter in just a moment. But first, on the pre-selections, you've got Tony Abbott this morning saying in The Australian that, well, it'd be inconceivable, almost inconceivable, if there were to be a challenge to the Liberal MP Craig Kelly after Malcolm Turnbull endorsed Mr Kelly. Then a few pages into the paper, you see Mr Abbott actually pushing a challenge against Bronwyn Bishop in the seat of Mackellar. There's not a lot of consistency in that, is there, from the former PM?
I think Tony Abbott, like all of us, understand that you have pre-selections in all seats that are open to local members. We're at the end of the day accountable to our local members and to our constituency in the Parliament ultimately. So it's healthy to have a pre-selection system which is not a stitch-up, but at the same time, Craig Kelly has been a very strong member of Parliament. He has significantly lifted his margin. He's a great local campaigner. He brings to the Parliament extensive small business experience, and he's been a good friend and colleague. So I would really hate to see him go. I don't think he deserves to go. Well, Bronwyn Bishop has made a significant contribution to the Parliament over an extended period of time, and she thinks she can continue to do that. And in both Craig and Bronwyn's case, we'll leave it to the local electors to decide, because ultimately it's their decision. But certainly they have made great contributions and will continue to do so.
South China Sea remains a very difficult issue in terms of our foreign policy as a nation, and you've got Julie Bishop making these comments in Tokyo. It seems innocuous, saying that we support the right of the Philippines to have an international arbitration on the disputed territory in the South China Sea, but yet the Chinese Foreign Ministry responding very forcefully overnight, saying that they don't respect that this arbitration is legal under international law, and that Australia should recognise that.
Well, Julie Bishop has proven to be a very skilled diplomat, often in difficult circumstances during her time as Foreign Minister, and dealing with some of these South China Sea issues, and particularly navigation and the freedom of navigation through those important waters is just another one of those. And there are heightened tensions in the region. She's obviously speaking to the key players as she's travelling through Asia, and no doubt will have very constructive talks with the Chinese on this issue.
Do Australian policymakers in the West generally understand, do you think, appropriately the level of passion and belief in terms of the sovereignty rights that the Chinese claim here of the rising China? Do you think that they grapple sufficiently enough with their beliefs on this?
I do, and this is not a new issue, Kieran. As you know, it's involved countries like the Philippines, like Vietnam, like obviously the Chinese, and many other countries in the region for some time. And what we want to see is freedom of navigation, and we don't pick sides in these debates, but we do speak truthfully and openly, as you would expect a democratic nation like Australia to do. And I think Julie Bishop is handling this issue very appropriately in the way that she's conducting these discussions and making these comments.
Minister for Northern Australia and Resources, Josh Frydenberg, thanks for your time this morning live from Brisbane. We'll talk to you soon. A quick break. Back in just a moment.